Hello, my name is Fernando Garci Crespo, and I'm one of the hosts for Voting4Change. Today we have the pleasure of having Ranil Prasad, tell me if I pronounced it right.
It's close enough.
The president of the UBC NDP and campaigner extraordinaire. Your reputation precedes you. That's the word that I was looking for. Here Ranil has campaigned for a long time for progressive causes and for electoral reform. Why don't you tell us a little bit about why you're supporting? Why is electoral reform something that goes along with all the other myriad of causes that you support?
Awesome. Thanks for having me. One of the reasons why I started to support PR is because I saw that voters were getting really dissatisfied with our current election system. In the 2017 election, I was knocking on doors in the riding of Surrey-Whalley, and me and my buddy were just walking by a house, and we saw it had a BC Liberal sign, and we thought, that seems like a great house for us New Democrats to knock on. Knocked on the door, a man opens the door, and we talked to him a little bit, and I say, hey, are you going to be voting? And he said, I might not. And this is a person who's very committed to his party. He has an election sign, and he was very committed to BC Liberal causes. He talked about lowering taxes. He talked about creating jobs. But he wasn't going to show up to vote, and the reason he gave is that he lived in a very strong BC NDP riding. The person who wins that riding wins with 60% of the vote every time, so he felt compelled to stay at home, which is part of the growing dissatisfaction across the province when it comes to our election system. Think about all the Greens in the Lower Mainland who showed up to vote. In New West, they got 20% of the vote, didn't elect anyone. Think about all the New Democrats in the interior who showed up to vote. They went in, cast their ballots, but they only elected one person in the interior. And all the BC Liberals on the island, all they have is Parksville. They have nothing else here. It's all green and orange here. So the growing dissatisfaction with their election system, and the fact that there's these major policy changes every few years is something that that really makes me support proportional representation. And I think that it's great for all political parties. There's dissatisfaction isn't something that only BC Liberals face, or only BC Greens, or only New Democrats face. Dissatisfaction is across the board, and I think it's equal amongst voters across the political spectrum.
So you see it as a uniting issue that can bring people that may disagree on other issues together?
Definitely, yeah. Although I would say that some demographics are a bit more dissatisfied than others. Students often, when they want to show up to vote, students they're supposed to be the young political people that advocate for change, stomping on the sidewalk with signs. That's just not how things are anymore. They don't see the first past the post system as creating a vessel for change, because those big tent parties, the Liberals, the NDP, the Conservatives, they don't represent their values anymore. The big idea of a big tent party is that you walk across the center line in the political spectrum, and you have a big hug. You bring everyone in, you acknowledge everyone's issues, but that's just not the case anymore with the first past post system. So I think it's time to try something new.
So you think there will be more choice and more people will get engaged by what's happening in the legislature?
Absolutely, yeah. Better proportional representation means better collaboration on every issue, whether it's education, whether it's taxation, whether it's the environment and the economy. Having more voices at the table and being truly representative of what BC is and what BC looks like is an important feature of PR. We'll have minority governments. That's nothing to be afraid of. I think the government here in Victoria right now, the provincial government's doing a great job at showing that a minority government will work. When Andrew Weaver and John Horgan decided to take power with their confidence supply agreement, you saw the Vancouver Sun and the province saying that this government will last a few months, Weaver will get disappointed and he'll drop the ball. That just hasn't happened, and I think we'll see an election in 3 years when we are required to have one.
Perfect. And you talk about there being more choice. How can we avoid becoming a place like the Netherlands with like 50 elected parties? How can we avoid proportional representation not working out and having way too much fragmentation?
Yeah, as David Moscroft, he's a PhD, I think he's doing a postdoc at Carleton now, but he talks a lot about political culture, and the political culture of BC isn't one of fragmentation. There's no major anti-immigrant sentiment in BC. There's no major racist sentiment in BC. A lot of it's like a rural-urban divide, which one of the systems that that's on the ballot is attempting to address. But I don't think we'll see the fracturing that we see in Europe, just because our issues are so different. You know, we don't have an immigration crisis in BC. We don't have our economies collapsing. Things are going pretty well in BC, and honestly, if I were to make a prediction, I would say that we'd get maybe a couple new BC Conservative MLAs. Other than that, I don't see any extra fringe parties. You're not going to see the Work Less Party or the Marijuana Party got elected in BC, because there is a 5% threshold to be elected. And that 5% threshold, I think, is high enough to keep out the major crazy parties.
Yes, and as I've heard before, if a crazy party gets more than 5% of the vote, you have a bigger issue than them getting elected.
Absolutely.
You know? So you talked about young people being more and more disengaged and less likely to show up to vote. Have you seen, as a university student, both Ranil and I go to UBC, and have you seen as a student there that people would be more engaged in their PR? Are they engaged in the referendum? What is happening?
Well, this goes with everyone, not just university students. But when I knocked on doors with Fair Vote, I'd knock on the door and I'd say, "Have you heard about the referendum?" And they'd say, "Oh, didn't know we were having one, but you know, you can tell me a little bit more about that." But especially with students and youth, we see growing dissatisfaction. And just using the UBC example, people often think of UBC as a sort of hippie, liberal campus. You know what, maybe that's true. UBC may be a passively liberal campus, passively left-wing, but the dissatisfaction there is quite alarming. It's tough I run a political club at UBC, and it's tough for us to have engagement with people. You know, they might passively support the NDP, but they won't do anything about it.
Yes.
They'll passively support the Green Party. They won't do anything about it. Maybe they'll show up to vote. The statistics on voter turnout amongst youth is incredibly depressing.
Yes.
Maybe 1/3 of youth will show up to vote. So,
yeah.
you know, when youth don't show up to vote, we're just letting people who show up to vote have more power.
Which is like right-wing, more conservative vision, and we don't end up
yeah.
solving issues like climate change. Like I remember yesterday, that there was a debate amongst the mayoral candidates of Vancouver in UBC, and there was space for 100 people out of the 50,000 students. 40 people show up. And I'm like saying, this is the city policies that affect you. But I completely agree. If we had a system that maybe allowed their voices to be heard more, maybe they would be more willing to show up.
Absolutely, yeah. And the Vancouver electoral system is probably mixes the worst of first past the post and mixes the worst of PR, and creates probably one of the worst election systems that we have in Western democracy. It'd be so much better if we could just rank candidates in Vancouver.
Yes, and there has been the municipal government has asked the province to do that, but the province under the BC Liberals never allowed for Vancouver to change its electoral system. And so yes, and you talk about young people and running a political club in campus and being an outreach coordinator in Vancouver during the summer. And how was it? Was it easy to engage youth in coming out to campaign? Easier for PR than, for example, for the New Democratic Party, or was it equally as hard to keep young people engaged and coming out?
Well, young people have it's a bit tougher to get young people out, maybe at this time of year. During the summer, I noticed that a lot of our volunteers at Fair Vote, it was a bit of a bimodal distribution. So you either had young people or you had elderly folks. They're sort of like the missing middle of the 35 to 60 demographic. But the NDP has a unique advantage when it comes to proportional representation, as opposed to other third-party referendum advertisers, in that the NDP is a political party. So there's already this existing political apparatus that they can utilize. The NDP, in the last election, purchased the voters list. So the NDP has access to everyone's voter information, as do the BC Liberals and the BC Greens. So look forward to a phone call from an NDP volunteer or a Green Party volunteer, and maybe put the phone down if you see a BC Liberal calling. But that's a unique advantage because it's tough to get people out at the door. You'll knock on their door and you'll get an 11% response rate. You'll call someone on the phone, 9% of people will answer the phone. And that's only people with landlines. So I don't know about you, but I personally don't own a landline. I have a cell phone like
No.
most people. So the NDP side of the campaign is also exciting because the NDP has money. Just on the basis of banning union and corporate donations, and the great work that John Horgan and the BC NDP have been doing, the NDP has money to work with when it comes to proportional representation. And just the BC Liberal side of things, I mean, they have money as well. They talked about using their per vote subsidy to fight against PR. But the thing that Andrew Wilkinson and the BC Liberals are doing is that they're hosting these town hall events. They're saying that we'll get far-right radicals elected in BC. There'll be paralysis in government. But I think the real thing that the BC Liberals are afraid of is their coalition falling apart. The BC Liberals, as you know, and as Wikipedia will tell you, they're a coalition of federal Liberals and federal Conservatives that work together to keep the NDP out. And under PR, I don't think that coalition is going to last. We're going to see more of a reflection of the federal system. And just in general, the Conservatives and the BC Liberal coalition have just been abused for so long. No one would call the BC Liberals fiscally conservative, you know, with the debt at ICBC or the debt at BC Hydro.
So both the Liberal side and the Conservative side are being misrepresented by these huge tent parties.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Frankenstein's monster of political parties.
So, but this kind of opposition to PR doesn't only come from the Liberals. I mean, the NDP's own Bill Thielman is one of the most outspoken person. So, have you encountered a lot of that wing within the NDP? Is it mostly an older wing? Is it mostly a union wing? What side of the NDP follows that non-PR, or is it just a one-person group?
I think it's the Bill Thielman show when it comes to the no prop rep people. I've met a couple New Democrats who are opposed to PR, but they do so on partisan reasons. And I'm not doing this because I want the NDP elected till kingdom come. I'm doing it because I want a fair election system.
Yeah.
And people talk about, you know, if we get PR, then we'll never have the great majorities that the NDP had under Dave Barrett or under Glenn Clark or Mike Harcourt or whoever else ruled the NDP. But if you're using partisan advantage as an argument for an election system, you've lost the argument.
Yes, and I think it's wonderful that so many young New Democrats like yourself are getting involved and doing the right thing by campaigning for the side that they believe in. And have you talked to any MLAs who oppose it, or is there a broad consensus within the leadership of the NDP that we should move to proportional system?
So the debate on this is pretty much on party lines. The Greens obviously have a lot to gain under proportional representation, as they should have around a dozen MLAs in BC, mostly taking seats pretty much equivalently from the BC Liberals and BC NDP. But I've talked to some BC Liberal MLAs about this, and it seems as though when they give their arguments, it seems as though it's been thrusted from, you know, some party staffer.
It's a party script.
It's a party script. They'll tell you, oh, you know, look at Italy and look at Sweden and look at all these countries that have these far-right radicals. And, you know, that is true that there are some countries under PR, but that's not a PR problem. It's a problem of political culture.
And it's a problem of issues concerning inequality and joblessness and environmental and social concerns not being listened to, and people get angry about it and go to the left or the right.
Absolutely.
But it's about how we can deal with those issues, and if everyone is represented, as you talk about PR being, then I think we will get that side represented. And me personally, as an immigrant and a minority within BC, I'm very curious to see what PR will do for minorities. Do you know? Have you heard or do you know any ideas around that? But apparently I think we have to go, and we'll leave that for the next segment. But thank you very much, and thank you to Ranil Prasad for coming to the show, and thank you for watching Voting for Change.